Thank you for joining us. Jewish people have lived in Syria for the last 2,500 years, as they have in so many other parts of the world. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they were confronted with military conscription into the Turkish Ottoman Empire. And what followed then was increasing violent anti-Semitism after Israel became a state in 1948. The Jewish people suffered a severe decline in their economic and social conditions, and their citizenship, businesses, and homes were confiscated. For these reasons, the Jews fled Syria, and they scattered to foreign lands all over the world. One of these were Elie Sutton's family, and he will join us and tell us about this part of history following these messages.
I read Life Extension magazine to keep abreast of medical discoveries that can literally save my life. Life Extension's track record, dating back to 1980, shows that they are decades ahead of conventional medicine in identifying proven methods to prevent and treat the diseases of aging. Reading Life Extension magazine will empower you to take control over your health and longevity. And as a special favor to me, the Life Extension Foundation will give a free 1-year subscription to anyone today. Just call the number on this screen to obtain your free Life Extension subscription. There's no cost, no obligation, just the opportunity to discover solid options to live longer and better. Call the number on the screen today to start receiving Life Extension magazine each month.
Take charge of your health. Get your free subscription to Life Extension magazine now by calling toll-free 1-800-509-9117 or visit www.lef.org.
With us now is author Elie Sutton and Neil Bandry. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Elie. Neil, good to have you back.
Thank you.
You have a very interesting story, and it is fascinating, and few people in our audience realize that Jews in Syria have a long history, and as probably Jews everywhere in the world do. But anyway, you wrote this book, Alien at Home, very interesting. And I'd like you to share in our brief program here as much as you can of this part of history.
Of course, our ancestry in Syria goes back minimum 3,000 years. The days of King David. As a matter of fact, the story goes that even Abraham Abinu had been to that area when he was first doing his promoting the monotheism. So Syria is home to the Jews for many, many, many thousands of years. If we were to go to the 7th century, we would know that Muhammad started Muslim religion in that area. And even though not everybody appreciated monotheism in terms of our ancestry, we survived. And at one moment in time, when the times of Spanish Inquisition, when the Jews of Spain were chased away, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire made the following statement, referring to the Spanish royalties who chased the Jews out. It says, how stupid could they have been? They helped me enrich my kingdom to their detriment. They let the Jews, with their brains, with their money, with their background, leave. So I have to thank them for doing so, because I'm the richer for it.
Very interesting point you made. I'd like to ask you to tell our audience a little bit about your particular family and when your family left Syria.
Well, I'd like to give you a little bit more background as far as our community as a whole, and then I'll be more specific about my family. The community, as I have said before, had lived in Syria for many, many centuries. And when we come up to the new recent era of, let's talk about after World War I. Actually, Syria as a country did not exist prior to the end of World War I. It was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire lasted over 1,500 years. So Syria, even though it was referred to as Syria, but really it was a province of the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, when the Allies have won the war, they took the Ottoman Empire and broke it up into many areas. Why did they do that? Because the Ottoman Empire made the stupid mistake of joining Germany during the World War I. And since Germany lost the war, the Ottoman Empire lost and got divided. And Syria became Syria, and the Allies who were making peace, world peace, opted to take Syria and give the French a mandate to control Syria as well as Lebanon. At the same time, they gave the British Palestine, and they gave the British Iraq, what we know today as Iraq. So after that World War I, that's the history of Syria. Now obviously, when the Syrians became away from the Ottoman Empire, they wanted to become a country of their own, and they wanted independence, and they were fighting the French for independence. But the French was not going to give up so very quickly. They had a mandate. So they had problem with the French, and their goal was shut down for quite a while, till after World War II. After World War II, the Syrians revolted, and they were successful in throwing the French out, and they became independent.
It's interesting to reflect on the politics of the Middle East, and as you were saying, the beginning of the last century, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, how they divided the Middle East, not only the eastern part, but of course North Africa as well, Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco. Politics, how interesting. They drew lines on the map with rulers making vertical lines, and these became countries. But tell us a little bit more about how you see the politics that restructured the Middle East.
Well, I'd like to continue, and I'll try to be brief, from 1945 onward. 1945, that's the time the Syrians were able to throw the French out and become independent. But the timing was such, they were already world talk about giving the Jews a homeland in Palestine. And that created trouble for the Jews all over the Middle East, because now they were looked at as spies or enemies of Syria and Lebanon, being that they are Jews, and if there's going to be a home for the Jews in Palestine, it is assumed that their loyalty will be to the Jews in Palestine, which eventually became Israel, so they would be more in favor of Israel rather than their own home country, which is Syria. And that troubled the community, and they started to think that this is no longer our home nor our future, and we have to get out. And that was the beginning of the Exodus whether voluntarily or forced. But that is the beginning of the end of our community in Syria.
Are there any Jews that remain in Syria at this time?
No. There's only a very tiny number in Damascus, but not where I come from, which is Aleppo. There is no Jews in Aleppo whatsoever. But in Damascus there are some elderly people, not very many, but that's about it.
And they were spared the Holocaust, whereas in Neil's family's country in Holland,
Sure.
There was a totally different experience.
That is correct.
Yes. Do you have any thought with regard to this, Neil? The difference between the persecution of Jews in the Middle East at that time in history as compared to Europe, what the Nazis were able to do in Europe, but did not get around to doing it in Syria?
Well, a question for Elie, if I may.
Sure.
You've studied this history and you've studied all of these. You grew up in, was it partly in Syria, but also you escaped, was it through China?
Mm-hmm.
And with your family doing this exodus, and with all of the rest of the Jews doing this exodus, all of these people lost all that they had in Syria. They lost everything they built up, and everything that they had is to them virtually gone. Whatever they didn't smuggle out or get out of the country was the real estate, their homes, their businesses, everything was gone.
Sure.
So your family experienced all of these things growing up. So I believe you're one of how many children?
8.
8 children.
Mm-hmm.
And your brothers and sisters had to flee Syria in different ways and in different things. That's what I noticed in your book, Alien at Home.
Correct.
And I commend you on all that you've been able to achieve in your life, having basically started from scratch, except of course you had your father's guidance and your, all of those things that he taught you, you were able to bring with you in your brain, and you learned also.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just overwhelmed, Richard. I'm overwhelmed with what Elie had to go through and what his family had to endure.
It's a very, very fascinating story, and few people are aware of this perspective of the Middle East. And of course, things might not really change that much, which brings me to the present. I don't want to date this interview by discussing current events in Syria, but what are your feelings with regard to the prospect for peace in the Middle East? Do you believe that regimes in the Middle East will finally make peace and recognize Israel's right to exist?
I'm sorry to tell you, no, I do not have the confidence that it will happen. And as a matter of fact, if you read nowadays the newspaper, everybody is of the opinion that America is wasting their time, and our Secretary of State is wasting his focus on the Palestinian-Israeli peace accord, which hardly anyone believes that it's going to happen. And I personally am very pessimistic about that possibility, and I would oversimplify it by saying the Arabs as a whole, and particularly the Palestinians or the countries surrounding Israel, do not, in their own mind, heart, believe that they will accept Israel among them. And as a matter of fact, if you read the newspaper nowadays, Netanyahu keeps asking Abbas to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. It has never been mentioned, has never been said, and I believe personally that that is the crux of the problem. They are not willing to accept it. Of course, fortunately, and thank God, that Israel has become so powerful that Israel can take care of itself militarily, politically, and so on, but it's not because they are being tolerated, it's because Israel is forcing its way because of its military power and politically connected to America.
Yes, it's such a tragedy that Israel has been forced to defend itself in all of these wars throughout the years of its statehood, and such a tragedy. Yet there are some countries, Egypt and Jordan, have made some kind of peace with Israel. again based on the points you've made, what a tragedy that Anwar Sadat was murdered for the crime of making peace.
Well, my comment on that is the following. Sadat realized he tried more than one time to fight Israel through war. And he came to the realization that Israel is there to stay. So rather than continue to lose ground and people, might as well have peace with Israel and live side by side. But the reason he was killed is because his people never accepted Israel. And that's the same thing would happen to any other, to Arafat or whoever it may be, that is really truly willing to accept Israel. Now, you may say, why Egypt is made peace? It's because Anwar Sadat, who at that time was in control, felt it is wiser for his people to have peace, even though it is referred to as cold peace rather than true peace. But nevertheless, he stopped warring Israel. The same thing with Jordan. Well, again, Jordan population, big percentage of it is Palestinians. So I believe that in their own heart and mind are not truly wanting to make full peace with Israel, but in order to survive and in order to get the help from America, they were willing to make what again we called cold peace with Israel.
Interesting that you point out that a large percentage of the Jordanian people are in fact Palestinian. So there really is a Palestine already,
Sure.
actually.
Sure.
So what are your feelings with regard to the prospect of maybe education, technology, having an influence, maybe lead to some kind of better peaceful situation?
Well, needless to say, Israel tries very hard to educate the Arabs and the Palestinians because Israel believes that in the long run it is much healthier for all concerned to be at peace rather than be at war. And in order to achieve peace, they would need to give them stability, economic stability, and technology, and their ability to advance. Otherwise, they will be way behind, and they will be totally resentful of the fact that they are not reaching the level that other people are reaching, particularly their neighbors Israel.
We have a mutual friend, Larry Bihar, very active with Jewish National Fund, and that reminds me of the Arava Institute, one of the endeavors of JNF, and they have this institution in the Negev, in the desert, where Arabs and Jews together are educated with regard to drip irrigation and innovation in agriculture in general. And it's an enlightening and inspiring example to see, sadly, only a few people interacting, but interacting very positively. But it's isolated, not throughout the region. If a significant percentage of the population in the Middle East were to take a close look at the example of what the JNF is doing with the Arava Institute and say, hey, maybe this could be expanded and we could utilize this common sense attitude and do more in cooperation.
Well, I commend Israel and I commend the small segment that is willing to cooperate with Israel because they realize without that progress, they're going to stay way behind.
Elie, tell us more about your family. You have 7 siblings. Are they also in the United States at this time?
Unfortunately, we lost 3 of the 8. But the other 5 are in America, and they are well, and they are successful, they are family, they are community members, and they're very productive.
And you personally keep the flame of heritage burning in your family. You attend synagogue on a daily basis, I understand.
That is correct. That is correct. Yes. And I have to tell you, I was very lucky to have been able to, after having spent 4 years in Shanghai, China, and sometime in Japan, I was able to reach America and enter a community that is really as if they were transplanted from Syria to America. They have the same tradition, they have same background, the same legacy, and we just very, very grateful for that.
Elie, what made you write this book, Alien at Home, Divine Intervention?
I came to America and got married and had a family in America. My children and my grandchildren, it's the same with people from the community, would ask questions about the old country. And at one time or the other, I said to myself, don't let it go to waste. Maybe we should tape it and have it recorded. So I started to do that, but then unfortunately my wife got ill and eventually I lost her, so sort of everything put on ice. But then when things restabilized in my life, I came back to the idea and I started to write about my life history. And again, I was fortunate that we had a community magazine that publishes weekly. And I got the idea to contact them and had a meeting with them and asked them if they would consider publishing my articles about my history. And after a couple of meetings, they have acquiesced to give me 10 articles into that magazine. And now, instead of a weekly, they grew and they made it monthly magazine rather than weekly. And after the 10 articles were done and finished and published, we had a meeting and they were kind enough to allow me to continue the articles. And instead of 10, we ended up writing 28 articles. And people, of course, from the community were very, very supportive, and they were very pleased with the articles. And then the very same people who were reading the articles said it won't be a bad idea if you would put all of these articles and put them in a book.
So a certain number of people all over the world are reading your book and getting information they didn't have before and getting a new perspective on history in your particular area. But yet we live in a world where information and misinformation are manipulated by mass media. When something happens in Israel, lies by omission are perpetrated, emphasizing negatives, and worse events that occur elsewhere are minimized. A selective outrage against Israel and a criticism of Israel and a smoothing over of worse crimes, atrocities, and terrorism that occur even here. I can hardly imagine how the world tolerates people referring to the Fort Hood massacre as workplace violence when clearly it was an act of Islamic terrorism. So these lies by omission and half-truths are astonishing. What are your thoughts with regard to the fact that media misrepresents the truth?
Well, you have to remember and to realize that anti-Semitism is ever around, from day one till now. So anybody who is anti-Semitic likes to find ways to promote their anti-Semitism.
Elie, your book is a very interesting story. It's the story of your life. It's the story of your trials and tribulations. I look forward to reading more of it sometime soon. But a question for you. The title is very catchy, Alien at Home, Divine Intervention. If I may ask, what was the divine intervention?
Okay. Well, I'll answer you on both of them. Alien at home is self-explanatory. I was at home, however, I never felt at home.
In Syria.
In Syria. So that's why I was an alien in my own home.
Yes.
That's the meaning of
Yes.
the alien at home.
Yes.
And in terms of divine intervention, I attribute so many examples in my life for divine intervention. I could have been dead more than once without divine intervention. I could have been in big trouble, in all sorts of trouble, if it were not for divine intervention.
Yes.
So I can cite many, many situations in my life that I'm very grateful for the help that I got, not from another friend, not from a family member, but from divine intervention.
I understand. So would you say most people would believe in and accept the fact that there is a creator that watches over us?
Not everybody.
You wrote this book, and the question, of course, is, what's your next book going to be about?
I have plenty to write and plenty to say, but I don't know if I have the stamina and the strength to devote as much time as this book needed.
Well, I think it's quite an achievement, and your family reflects profound values which are inspiring to all of us. I want to thank you so very much for being with us today, Elie.
My pleasure.
Neil, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
Elie, very good to see you.
Same here.
This concludes our special show for today from On Location at Nova Southeastern University. I'm Richard Peretz. Thank you for being with us.